Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Helmi Handoko, the Business Development Manager at HHP Law Firm, member of Baker McKenzie. Welcome and thank you for joining today's webinar, Indonesia Leading Edge Omnibus Law Series, Recent Development in Real Estate Sector. We have a very exciting event that we have prepared for you today. Thank you to our distinguished guests who are here with us. Welcome and thank you to Mr. Panji Irawan as the Director of Treasury and International Banking of Bank Mandiri, and Mr. Andri Asmoro as the Chief of Economist of Bank Mandiri. Also welcome and thank you to Mr. Hayden Lui from the board member of the Indonesia Chambers of Commerce Hong Kong. Last but not least, welcome and thank you to Mr. Bima Sarumpayat as partner from the Real Estate Practice Group of HHP Law Firm. Today's session will cover key updates on the following: Indonesia's Property Update 2021, key changes to land, building, and strata title ownership, simplified licensing requirements for buildings and space utilization, and land bank. Before we begin, we would like to go over a few housekeeping notes. As you know, the session is being recorded today. The slides of today's webinar will be provided in a follow-up communication to you. Please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen to submit your questions at any point of today's session. We will be addressing these at the end of the presentation, and we will do our best to get to all of them. And lastly, similar to most of you, we are all working and presenting from our homes while we attempt to create a studio-like atmosphere for this session. So, however, please forgive the occasional background noise. And now I would like to invite Mr. Hayden Lui to open session with the welcome remarks from the Indonesia Chambers of Commerce Hong Kong. Mr. Hayden.
Thank you, Pak Helmi. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, member, and speaker, a very good afternoon to you all today, and welcome to our event. My name is Hayden, one of the board members of INACHAM Hong Kong. Our mission is to facilitate, to connect businesses in between Indonesia and Hong Kong. Your concern are our mission. We continuously to provide meaningful information and content to our member. If you're not yet our member, please visit our website at inachamhk.com to find out more information and stay tuned with us. Today is our third event on the Omnibus Law series topic. And the particular topic today is in real estate sector. No matter you are personal or corporate investor or any other stakeholder, it will be interesting for us to learn more about how the Olympus Law to bring impact to our business. We're absolutely delighted today to be able to invite our honorable speaker to share their expertise and insight on this particular topic. Last but not least, we would like to thank the continued support of INACHAM China, Macau, Baker McKenzie, and Bank Mandiri for this event. I hope you all will enjoy the event today. Thank you very much. Over back to you, Pak Helmi.
Thank you, Mr. Hayden, for the message from the Indonesia Chambers of Commerce Hong Kong. And now I'm pleased to introduce Mr. Panji Irawan as the Director of Treasury and International Banking of Bank Mandiri, who will officially welcome everyone who joined the session today. Over to you, Pak Panji.
Thank you, Pak Helmi. Dear Pak James Hartono, President of Indonesia Chamber of Commerce or INACHAM in Hong Kong, Pak Hayden Lui, Member of Board of INACHAM Hong Kong, also respected colleagues from Indonesia Chambers of Commerce in Hong Kong, Macau, and China, also dear speakers from Bakers and McKenzie Law Firm or /HHP Law Firm, Pak Bima Sarumpayat, the partner of real estate from HHP Law Firm, And distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Let me introduce myself to you all. My name is Panji Irawan. I am the Managing Director of Treasury and International Banking of Bank Mandiri Head Office, Jakarta. And it is a great honor for us to be with you here today in supporting this webinar, Indonesia Leading Edge Omnibus Law Series, Recent Development in Real Estate Sector. The COVID-19 pandemic has slowed down our movement and ability to meet in person. However, I'm grateful that the situation continues to improve, and I am confident that our concentrated efforts in abiding health protocols and provisions of vaccines will help us overcome this pandemic within the near future. Allow me to extend my gratitude and appreciation to the Indonesia Chamber of Commerce, or INACHAM, in Hong Kong, Macau, and China, as well as Baker and McKenzie Law Firm /or HHP Law Firm in arranging today's webinar. This is a great opportunity for us to continue strengthening our partnership, boosting Indonesia's economy, and increasing our bilateral relationship with Hong Kong. Distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, as we all know, the COVID-19 pandemic has caused significant disruption and suffering in almost every aspect of our lives, as well as adding mounted pressure on the global economy. From first quarter 2020 onwards, the global economy has been slowed down to 3.7% in 2020. However, Indonesia was able to defend its economy with a contraction of 2.07% at the end of 2020, a relatively stable figure compared to a majority of developed countries. Even the chief of economists of Bank Mandiri, Mr. Andreas Moro, projects that Indonesia 2021 economic growth will reach around 4.43%, and the Indonesian government predicts it will reach 5.5%. In the property sector, the industry is facing tough conditions due to the impact of the pandemic. The uncertainty and unstable economics inflicts pressure on the population purchasing power, which pivots them to postpone any plans to purchase any form of property. Meanwhile, some regulations have been released by our central banks, Bank Indonesia, to improve the property sector. For example, the loan-to-value ratios policy is set to be 100% for all credit facility category. The following regulation is issued by the Ministry of Finance Indonesia, which regulates property tax reduction to be set 0% for some criteria. However, the regulation will only impact to sales of any ready stock houses due to relatively short regulation period. It is only 6 months. While in the primary market, developers generally offer indent property or pre-sales. As of February 2021, Bank Mandiri has supported the property industry by financing the sector amounting to 18.3 trillion rupiah. Moreover, our exposure in mortgage loan amounted to 43.3 trillion rupiah, or equivalent to $2.96 billion, with more than 140,000 accounts. However, as a large financial institute, Bank Mandiri is still optimistic about the mortgage portfolio growing around 5% in 2021. And we will continue to adapt by providing the best offers while maintaining the quality of the bank's credit portfolio. As a strategy to maintain the credit portfolio quality and support government's programs during the pandemic, Bank Mandiri has conducted a COVID-19 restructuring program for 20,000 debitors, with an outstanding of 9.9 trillion or equivalent to $678 million. Moreover, Bank Mandiri has made some changes in our internal preferences by adjusting strategies to improve performance in 2021. For example, an intensification program on Bank Mandiri's customers by optimizing value chain potential as well as utilizing digital channels by collaborating with third parties to improve customer experience and to initiate new market penetration. Bank Mandiri also has several solutions related to the property business ecosystem, such as supporting more than 2,000 branches across Indonesia archipelago, transaction solution, for example, cash management, virtual account, and payment points, as well as having several multinational branches in overseas to support the business. For example, our branches in Singapore, Hong Kong, Shanghai, Dili, East Timor, Cayman Islands, and subsidiary bank in London. With enthusiasm, loyalty, and sound business growth, Bank Mandiri is committed to always being the first choice for you as a partner in providing banking services. Distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, we hope that from this Omnibus Law Series webinar, you can obtain new knowledge and insights from the material that will be delivered by our Chief of Economists, Mr. Andri Asmoro, and from the lawyer Baker and McKenzie Law Firm, or SSP Law Firm, Mr. Bima Sarumpait. Also, we will listen to Mr. Andri Asmoro explanation related to the implementation of Omnibus Law in Indonesia, which is set to improve and boost the property sector by easing the investment climate in Indonesia. We hope that with the increasing number of events such as this, we can enhance our close relationship and cooperation with business society in Hong Kong, Macau, and China. And without further ado, I thank you very much to you all, and please enjoy this webinar.
Thank you, Mr. Panji, for providing us with the recent condition of the real estate environment in Indonesia, as well as Bank Mandiri's plan to support the real estate business in Indonesia. And now I'm pleased to, thank you, Mr. Panji. And now I'm pleased to introduce our next speaker, Mr. Andri Asmoro, the Chief of Economist from Bank Mandiri, who will kick us off with presentation on Indonesia's Property Update 2021. Mr. Andri, over to you.
Thank you, Pak Helmi, Pak Panji yang terhormat, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Next slide, Pak Helmi, please. So thank you for the opportunity for me to share about Indonesian property sector and its outlook. First, let me share on Indonesia's economic trajectory before I begin with the property sectors. So as you might already know, Indonesia's economic growth is expected to rebound this year from -2.1% last year to around 4% this year on the back of three factors. Indonesia's economic growth is expected to rebound. This year from -2.1% last year to around 4% this year on the back of three factors. Pak Helmi, sorry, it's a technical problem. I think I cannot view my my picture here, my video.
Okay, that's fine,
Is
Mr.
it
Hendrik.
okay? Okay, all
yes,
right.
That's fine.
So I will continue, yeah. So Indonesia's economic growth is expected to rebound this year from minus 2.1% last year to around 4% this year on the back of three factors. Because of number one, low base effect in 2020, the continuation of government stimulus under National Economic Recovery Scheme, and the acceleration of the vaccination that will drive domestic demand and hence domestic economy. However, we still see that Indonesia's GDP growth will still stay at around minus 1.5% to 0.26% due to high base effect in the first quarter of 2020. This is our forecast actually, when Indonesia still has not fully affected by the COVID-19 and before the strict lockdown. Going forward, with some acceleration in investment as well as government spending, Indonesia's second half economic growth could grow between 4% to 5% this year. This will support demand for several sectors, including Indonesia's property sectors. Next slide, please. So some leading indicators have signaled us with some improvement or at least passing the rock bottom level. Consumer confidence index has been improving compared to second quarter 2020 level, while retail sales index showing down the first quarter this year because the government implemented micro-mobility limitation in some regions to lower the spread of COVID-19 case. Government stimulus and Bank Indonesia macroprudential relaxation on automotive sector has boosted the car and motorcycle sales in March. First quarter car sales growth only contracted minus 21% due to high base effect and some middle class spending on favorite cars. This also happens for motorcycle sales. Despite it's still low than pre-pandemic level, the auto sales is expected to be better this year. Next slide, Pak Helmi. In terms of overall spending, Indonesian people spending has passed the January 2020 level as our baseline level. Our Mandiri spending index figure tells us that the spending was significantly contracted April to May level due to the government policies to do large-scale social restriction. After that, the people's spending has gradually improved, but then again, dropped every time the government due to similar action to curb the COVID-19 cases. This year, vaccination and better health protocol should help the people spending to be better than previous February figure. We hope that Indonesia could continue reducing the number of cases and hence put the confidence of spending. Next slide. Now I'll start the summary of the property sectors. The property sector is currently under great pressure due to the COVID-19 pandemic, as Pak Panji mentioned before. BI's data shows that residential property sales for quarter 2020 still contracted by minus 20.1% year-on-year. And residential property prices only had limited growth at around 1.4% year-on-year in fourth quarter. Housing loans, or the mortgage, and apartment of ownership loans slowed in December 2020. Loan only grew around 3.5%, and the KPA, or the apartment ownership loan, only by 2.3%. In terms of housing sales last year, the COVID-19 has dampened people purchasing power. People hold their consumption and prefer to stay liquid by putting their money in the banks. This makes the housing sales drop by minus 37% for the large house, while small house contracted only minus 15.1%. Some of it because of the high backlog and also first-time buyer. Overall, Indonesia's property sector is fully in line with the ups and downs of the economy, regional and national level. Every time economic growth slowing down, the property sales will be gradually drops. We can divide the buyer of property in Indonesia as two types. People buying property for the first time means they need house for as the family sector, family shelter, and people buying property for the second time or more time for the investment cost. This type will really take a look on the growth expectation. Thus, the economy is expected to be gradually growing. We expect that the sales growth should improve in the next 6 to 9 months. However, government and Bank Indonesia have launched many stimulus for the property sectors. We hope this helps more to the sales of small houses as their purchasing power improving. Next slides. In terms of pricing, the COVID-19 really pushed the house price. This should be good for the first-time buyer, but remains challenging for the investor or house traders. As the first quarter of 2021, the housing price drops in every segment. Large house price growth is expected to drop 0.75%, or much lower compared to 0.94% in the third quarter of 2020. The same figure depicted for small and medium house, but with a better growth. For example, small house price growth is expected to grow by 1.9% in first quarter 2021, or drop compared to last year performance. Small house sales growth was helped by some stimulus from the government, and the price is relatively in line with majority willingness to pay. Historically, lifetime property price booming occurred in Indonesia was between fourth quarter 2012 and to first quarter of 2014. And after that, the price growth was declining. Going forward, maybe we will see a lagging in property price improvement at probably first quarter next year for the base case. But the good thing for this year is many stimulus will be coming, low interest rate environment, and the relaxation on the LTV. Next slides. Based on the regions, some cities have high price growth, while others only stay quite flat. For example, Banjarmasin, Denpasar, Palembang, and Pontianak are the cities that have small price growth, while Medan, Yogyakarta, Pekanbaru are some examples of cities that have quite higher price growth. Greater Jakarta is still considered as the best at the moderate range of growth. Next slide, please. As I mentioned before, the government subsidy mortgage becoming the favorite for the first-time buyer to buy the house. This is relatively small, going to the small house, and hence no wonder that the housing sales at this segment is considered high. North Kalimantan, Maluku, Central Java are the big three provinces that have high sales growth on the segment. The subsidized mortgage realization was indeed keep improving since 2018, reaching 58% even during the pandemic last year. Next slide. In terms of the supply, there are several leading indicators that that have improved in property sectors occurs in Indonesia, albeit negative figure in the first quarter of 2021. We can see from the chart of rising WPI, wholesale price index, especially for the construction, steel and iron growth, and domestic cement sales. We see the improvement was partially supported by government and Bank Indonesia policies, such as Bank Indonesia has provided some incentive for the property sectors, including the 100% LTV, which was followed by the government's property tax discount. These incentives are expected to encourage consumers to buy property. Number two, the budget for Housing Finance Liquidity Facility of FLPP was increased to 12.5 trillion in 2020. Number three, the Public Works and Housing Ministry Regulation number 13/2019 on saving-based housing financing assistance has decreased the FLPP down payment for low-income people to only 1%, previously 5%. The FLPP selling price may follow the prices in 2020, as there is no policy yet on the 2021 FLPP selling price. Then the last one is high potential demand, especially from the productive age of or millennials. The number of workers, civil servants, and private or SOE employees as 25 to 35-year-old is at 10.3 million people. Next slide, please, Pat. If we take a look on the number of the construction project, the growth of highest estimation are coming from the residential and industrial, which are expected to grow by around 48% this year. Industrial growth was mainly driven by government omnibus law that stated to support industrial estate as the base of competitiveness for manufacturing industries. Next slide, please. In terms of the location, Java Island are still the main target for the sales. There are an expectation of 56,000 new unit launched in Jakarta only. And together with West Java, Central Java, and East Java will be total at around 106,000 new property in the form of landed houses and apartments. Outside Java, of course, big cities like Medan in North Sumatra and Makassar in North Sulawesi will become the hotspot. So you can see that majority of the new property will be still coming from the Java Island. Next slide, please. To boost the property sectors, the government and Bank Indonesia launched relaxation for housing meet the criteria of number 1, selling price of maximum of 5 billion rupiah. Number 2, has been physically handed over during the incentive period or not pre-sales or indent. Number 3, the new home or handed over in ready to live condition. Yeah. And number 4, facility given to maximum 1 unit of landed houses or apartment per 1 owner and cannot be resolved within a year. So while for the LTV, implied both for the first house and second house for more. Next slide. Next slide again, please. I've already discussed this. Now, the big question is whether all the stimulus will have a significant impact for property sectors in the short run. For the banks, the answer is not really. Yeah. Since the probability of the property right now is on the problem for the property right now is on the demand side. Thus, if the government really boosts the demand side by containment of the COVID-19 spread and continue the stimulus, the demand is expected to stay better on the second half at the base case. In fact, the growth of home ownership through mortgage have been decreasing since 2016 and getting worse last year. Of course, we expect that this year we could see any improvement if the demand comes back. Thus, in our view, the LTV relaxation and tax-free are necessary during this time, but the demand side is sufficient to improve the pricing of the commodity of the property in this case. Next slide, please. In terms of interest rate, the environment is really supportive for the property players. We expect that Bank Indonesia will continue to manage low interest rates this year, at least until 2022. So if the Fed still manage the benchmark rate at low level, of course, Bank Indonesia will follow suit. So this should continue this year as liquidity in Indonesia, most banks are still ample and hence lower the cost of fund. So this will lower the mortgage rates this year, at least, once again, at least before the interest rate cycle change as the Fed start to increase their benchmark rate in the following 2 or 3 years. Next slide. According to Indonesia's Real Estate Association, developers can supply around 300,000 to 400,000 housing units annually. This amount surely went down in 2020 due to the pandemic. Developers are estimated to hold their capex and wait for the market to normalize before adding more ready-to-sell units. On the other hand, the cumulative housing needs is increasing. According to 2019 National Socioeconomic Survey or SUSENAS, Indonesia's housing need was still high at around 12.1 million housing units. Next slide. As I mentioned earlier, the backlog figure has helped the sales of the property. Compared to other 33 provinces, Jakarta has the best performance in cutting the backlog. So you can see here between 2018 to 2019, and I think continue to 2020 and 2021, Jakarta is still the province in Indonesia that successfully cutting the backlog compared to other provinces. Next slide, please. Now, on the positive side, next slide, please. Now, on the positive side, property sales in Indonesia will be supported by the millennials. As you can see the figure of the demographic in Indonesia, millennials will dominate Indonesia's population as they will reach 82 million by 2030. They have the highest preference for home ownership, but their percentage of expense for installments, including mortgage payment, is the second lowest. So I think this is the challenge in tapping the millennials for the property sectors in Indonesia. Next slide, please. According to two surveys, Alvara Research and the Susanas from the BPS, on average, at least half of the millennial families are without home ownerships. Penetration to this segment is evidently better with small and medium housing. Thus, at this point, we still believe that property will be resilient in the medium term, given to the fact that millennials will need home as they grow more mature when they have a family and stable works. Next. New developers need to consider the market demand, especially from the millennials. Regarding their preference in valuing residence, as you can see from the chart, senior millennials prefer to the inner city house, while junior millennials mostly prefer to the suburban. Hence, some property developers were posted with positive figures in suburban, like if we can see in near Jakarta, in Tangerang Selatan or South Tangerang. It's the neighbor of Jakarta. Next slide, please. In terms of the age and the type of the buyer, the most resilient buyers for small and medium to medium house are coming from the age between 31 to 40 years old, with fixed income earners as the backbones. But during the booming period, the buyers from entrepreneur or creative industries will support the sales like what we had before the pandemic. Next slide, please. Next slide, please, because this is, I've explained about the purchasing power, but you can see from the numbers, yeah, the purchasing power for the affordable housing prices, for example, 124 million rupiah. They expect for the interest rate, expected annual interest rate around 7.3%, and expected annual interest rate around 13.6 million rupiah. So like what I said before, so the purchasing power for the willingness to pay for Indonesian people, yeah, is at around 500 in the medium, yeah, 500 million. But for the lowest part is at around 124 million rupiah. Next slide, please. Still in line with what I explained in the beginning, the loan growth of simple house was surpassing to the other type of houses with around 16% growth. Another was coming from the commercial estate. This is probably due to the needs of working capital loan. Next slide, please. For office supplies, there are some risks ahead from the from oversupply figure and the tendency of people starting to adjust in working from home rather than to have a spacious working place in the several business districts. This will be limit the possibility of higher return for office space outside the center Jakarta. As per third quarter of 2020, there were 10.9 million square meter office supply in Jakarta provinces, where 63% of it located in central business district, especially the two big central business district in Sudirman and also in Kuningan. The rental rate and occupancy rate was decreasing compared to last quarters. Next slide, please. Up to end 2020, there are 10.9 million square meter, like I said, of office space in Jakarta, which is around 64% of it in the central business district, yeah, from Kuningan and also Sudirman business district. Around 212,000 square meter is including in the co-working space, or around 2.1%. Next slide. There are total of 47 brand operator co-working spaces in Jakarta at end of third quarter of 2020, or growing 60% from previous year. Co-working space was still dominated by WeWork and the local brand, such as Cohive, and they are the local brand with the largest share and most active in expansion. So I think going forward, yeah, the challenge for the co-working space is that people tend to prefer, yeah, to working from home rather than just to using or optimizing the co-working space. Next slide. In terms of the property sector for non-office space, the growth of retail property price is relatively stagnant, while working office price has contracted in fourth quarter of 2020. Retail property price was relatively stable in the fourth quarter of 2020, while the rental price contracted deeper in minus 0.32% year-on-year. This is because of the impact of mobility limitation during the pandemic. Next slide. So this is my last slide. I just want to share to you all that the mobility plays an important role in driving people to department store or restaurant, and especially affected to the property needs. If the pandemic were gone from Indonesia and people start to mobile at least at around 60% to 70% of the pre-pandemic level, we can hope that the recovery in the retail property, like the shopping malls and the supermarket, not as long as we expect today. So thank you all. I will end my presentation here, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Andri, for your presentation. And again, before we move to the next presentation by Mr. Bima, I would like to remind all of you, if you have any questions, please submit your questions in the Q&A box on the bottom of your screen, and we will address all your questions at the end of this presentation. With that being said, I would like to invite Mr. Bima to present your material for today. Over to you, Mr. Bima.
Thank you, Pak Helmi, and thank you, Pak Andri, for the very insightful presentation on the current situation of Indonesia's property sector. Distinguished guests, thank you for your time. I would like to now discuss and present relating to what changes have been introduced in the Omnibus Law. I think as a general understanding, the Omnibus Law, or what we call the Job Creation Law in Indonesia, was enacted by the government with the approval of our parliament to ensure that investments are welcome into Indonesia, to ensure that many investments will arrive into Indonesia so that jobs will be created in the need to support those investments. Now, my focus today is with respect to real estate. So the agenda today will be on what are the implementing regulations relating to the real estate sector in the Omnibus Law. And among those will be those relating to land, building, and strata title, and what simplified procedures have been introduced by the government with respect to buildings and how to utilize space and land in Indonesia. And lastly, the new concept of land bank introduced by the government. Next slide, please, Palmi. Next slide, please. Now, these are some of the key implementing regulations introduced after the Omnibus Law with respect to real estate. Now, the Omnibus Law itself was issued early November 2020. And in the Omnibus Law, it is stipulated that within 3 months after the enactment of the Omnibus Law, the government must issue the relevant implementing regulations. Now, this is not a small task because the Omnibus Law itself amends around 70 or 80 regulations and laws in Indonesia. So it's quite impressive that the government have been able to issue these regulations, implementing regulations, which shows the focus that has been placed by the relevant officials to ensure that the Omnibus Law can be implemented. Now, as a forewarning, I need to stress that, of course, while we already have these implementing regulations, the infrastructure itself is still in process. So not all of these procedures, can be 100% be implemented, but the government has placed certain ways on how to implement it while waiting the infrastructure to be ready. Now, what are the governmental regulations? The first ones is on changes introduced to the existing land titles in Indonesia. So this relates to the right to manage owned by the state-owned enterprises. This relates to the building rights. You may be familiar with the term HGB, the right to build, the right to cultivate, HGU, and also right to use the hak pakai land title, and also strata titles. Some other changes are also introduced with respect to land registration. When can you apply for extensions, for example? There's also a new government regulation on how to settle discrepancies, which unfortunately still happens in Indonesia because of the lack of online system with respect to maps, geospatial maps, land utilization maps, and so on and so forth. The next one is the new system called Space Utilization Confirmation, that will assist investors to find out what can be done in a certain area and how to do this centrally, as opposed to having to go to the relevant institutions in the relevant districts in Indonesia. The next one is on buildings. Again, it introduces some simplification to ensure that property owners, property developers will be able to get the relevant permits in a more expeditious manner. Lastly, is a more technical. No, the second one is a technical requirements on housing and on apartments. Next slide, please. So these are the key highlights before I dive into these items in more detail in the next slides. First of all, on land registration, I mentioned on how there are certain changes to rights over land. Now, before the Omnibus Law was enacted, there were rumors where investors will be able to get an upfront 100 years of land concession, land rights. Everything that all investors want in Indonesia. That investors, foreigners will be able to have a right of ownership, freehold land in Indonesia. Unfortunately, I can say that's not really the case. But the government still introduces methods so that investors will get some additional comfort, knowing that the initial land titles can be extended upfront, without having to wait until near expiry term of the land title. On electronic land documents, the government has finally introduced the ability of landowners to register land acquisition, to register their land ownership, to register land mortgage by way of online, electronic, as opposed to having to go to the relevant land office where the land is located to get this certificated. The next one is on strata title ownership for foreigners. We will discuss on what type of who can actually have strata title ownership of property in Indonesia in terms of foreigners. And the next one is on titles and registrations that can now be registered for underground and above ground space in Indonesia. So that's one side of it. How land title is important for investors. The second one is the government has actually listened to all the complaints and the uproars by fair to say by almost all investors on how it's really hard to get permits in Indonesia with respect to buildings. How it takes time to get permits with respect to buildings in Indonesia, and how it's too bureaucratic. Now, well, although it's fair to say that it's not really a one-day process, but actually now it's a far easier process. Most of them now can be done online, of course, with the caveat that it's still waiting for the readiness of the infrastructure. Okay. And if certain data, certain approvals are not given or not ready on a district or regional level, the central government can now take over. So they can push so that permits can be issued regardless of the fact that the regional government may not be ready at a certain point in time. Okay, so the next point I mentioned about space utilization confirmation. Now the last one is land bank. Now land bank is introduced by the government to respond to some complaints, some questions by investors on how can the government assist investors so that the investors can get land more easily. so that they can do away with certain issues that have been faced in trying to secure land in Indonesia. So as opposed to having the need to reach out to individual landowners, which may or may not have the relevant legal documents, a new entity called Land Bank is established, introduced by the government. So it's a legal entity with funds injected by the government. It also can obtain funds from third parties that will be granted the powers and titles to land in the form of right to manage, will then be able to enter into cooperation with third parties, with investors. So it provides an alternative to investors, so that in addition to the need of having to find land on their own and contact individual owners in Indonesia, they can contact the land bank, and discuss with them on what type of land are available, what type of cooperation can be entered into, so that investors can get land ownership, land in Indonesia. Okay, although I need to note that the government regulation for land bank unfortunately has not yet been enacted. We've seen drafts of the government regulation, but for certain reasons it has not yet been enacted. But I will discuss on this issue based on the drafts that we've seen. Next slide, please, Helmi. Next slide. Now, what are the changes to land titles introduced under this implementing regulation? Okay, so I mentioned earlier, how it was issued around 4 months after the Omnibus Law was enacted. It actually amends and revokes quite a number of regulation. For example, we have a regulation back in 1996, which was still being used until the issuance of this new government regulation on how to explain the type of rights that investors can get in Indonesia. It's some of the provisions was really outdated, but the good thing is that now we have a new government regulation that updates these requirements. Similarly on land registration and on ownership of properties by foreigners in Indonesia. Next slide, please. So these are the key changes. The first one is on the income that needs to be paid to the land office. Now, we seem to have lost the slides. Arina, can you help perhaps? Apologies for this technical issue. Just waiting for my colleagues to assist in sliding the shares. My apologies. So I was mentioning about the fact that we have been using a 1996 law on how to explain the type of land ownership in Indonesia. Now in terms of the changes, the land rights that are available for foreigners has not changed. So we still have the fact that the freehold title, the hak milik, right to own, is still only available for Indonesian individuals. We still have the most popular land title for people who would like to build in Indonesia, the hak guna bangunan, the HGB, which is basically to build. Now, in the new regulation, there's no changes to the right to build regime. It's still available only for Indonesian entities. And Indonesian entities also means that Indonesian foreign-owned entities. So the investment vehicle that investors can establish to invest in Indonesia. Okay, in terms of validity period, the HGB also is the same. the initial validity period is for a maximum of 30 years, which can be extended for a maximum of 20 years, which can then be renewed. But the difference now is that while this is only a technical change, the implementing regulation actually mentioned that the renewal can be given for a maximum of 30 years. Can we go to the previous slide, please, Zoe? Okay, so again, similarly for cultivation, you still have the same type of land age due. Similarly for the use of building, you still have the same type of land, which is right to use, hak pakai. Now, what has changed? Previously in the 96 regulation, also in the 1970s regulation with respect to land registration, you can only apply for an extension or a renewal of a land title near the expiry of the land title itself. So you can only apply for an extension 2 years before it expires. Now, understandably, that has caused some anxiousness to investors, right? I only have an initial period of 30 years. Now I can only have assurance that it can be extended near its expiry. How can I not get an assurance upfront? Now, under the implementing regulation now, it is stipulated that investors, operators can already apply for an extension of a land title once the land has been utilized. So you buy your land, you buy your HGB, you have an initial period of 30 years. Once you it's ready to be operated, you have the permits, you can immediately apply for an extension for another maximum of 20 years. So in that way, after you've constructed, you have an assurance of 50 years already upfront in your land title document, without the need to wait until the term. Okay, and then the next one that is also introduced by the government to try to assist to give some comfort to the investor is the fact that once your extension period has expired, right, you still have a 2 years grace period to apply for a renewal. Previously, if you fail to do so in the last 2 years before the expiry of your land title, the land is deemed to be reverted to the state, to be returned to the state. And so with this introduction, at least you have a grace period. If for some reason the landowner forgot to renew the land title, you still have that assurance. Okay. Can we go to slide number 10, please? Yes, still the previous slide, slide 10, page 10. Yep, next one, next slide. Okay, thank you. Okay, the next key change with respect to the ability to process everything online, I mentioned about this. Everything is now electronically ready, recorded at the land office. So this is a start. I mean, ideally this should have been done years and years ago, but at least now it's a start. Registration is done online. Now, how can this help? This helps in the issue of hopefully in the near future, where people who would like to get a confirmation on land ownership, for people who would like to get a confirmation on whether or not there is any encumbrance on the land title, these will be able to be made to be done online. Now, currently, although the land registration on an online system is already made possible, if you want to do a land search, everything still needs to be done manually, by submitting a written letter together with the power of attorney from the landowner for you to get a confirmation from the land office on who owns the land, on whether you have an encumbrance over the land. Now, with the start of an online and electronic system registration, hopefully in the near future, everything can be done online. So it's faster. Next slide, please. We mentioned about extension, about renewal. Now there is a clarification that land title can be relinquished for public interest. It has always been the case since the introduction of relinquishment of land for public interest. Of course, this is not an easy process. There needs to be a stipulation by the government on the area, and there's very limited activities that can be deemed as public interest. We are talking about the public transportation, for the railways, for example. Now, the next change actually puts the onus to the investor. It is now stipulated in a regulation that the landowner, everybody who owns land title, must utilize the land within 2 years after it has been granted. This is to avoid people to hold on to land just to speculate and sell it in the near future. So government really wants to see actual activities, actual construction, that the investment is implemented. What's the risk of not doing this? The risk is there is a possibility that the land can then be put into the list of abandoned land. The government is now procuring a list of abandoned land. If the land is abandoned, we will discuss later on, the land can then be transferred to the land bank and can be utilized by third parties. So this is a new requirement which investors need to pay attention to. Next slide, please. This is with respect to land registration, whereby previously everything is done manually, by maps, people collecting the maps. The land office will then will enter into the land book for data, for updating. Now there is a requirement, in addition to the mass media use, because not everyone is actually reading newspapers, this information will be provided online in the land office's website. So people will be able to find out, whether or not an area of a certain area, a land in a certain area is being measured for the purpose of land registration. Okay, I mentioned about the fact that encumbrances is also can be done electronically, and also with respect to documents. So we all know. I mean, for those of you who have operated in Indonesia, we know that the land certificate document is a green paper issued by the land office, be replaced. So that can become an issue because there is no method for you to get a replacement of the land certificate. So everything being done electronically, the land office will be able to issue electronic documents as evidence for land ownership. Next slide, please. Now, strata title ownership by foreigners. We've received many questions, from people, foreigners who would like to acquire a property in Indonesia. So it has never been clear in the past until the issuance of a new regulation back in 2016 and 2017. The 2016-27 regulation actually already allows a foreigner to acquire property in Indonesia with the following requirement. First of all, the foreigner must provide benefits to Indonesia. So it's the foreigner is either investing in Indonesia or working in Indonesia. It needs to provide assurance that there is a benefit for the investor coming into Indonesia. So not just for holiday purposes. Secondly, the foreigner needs to have a stay permit. Okay, and stay permit is termed quite broadly in the regulation. So it can be any type of stay permit. Of course, the strongest one would be the permanent permit, or the temporary stay permit if you're working in Indonesia. And then the last point is that the land title for this property ownership by foreigners, based on the 16 and 17 regulation, is in the form of right to use. So hak pakai, so not really right to own. So Why? Because under our old 9060 regulation, foreigners can only acquire a right to use land title. So that's why the 16 and 17 regulation introduces a concept whereby if you are a foreigner, you have a stay permit, and you would like to buy, for example, an apartment, then you can go ahead buy the apartment. Why? Because the apartment is already in an HGB title, the right to build title. That HGB title will then be converted into a right to use title. So that's up to since 17 until now. Now we have this new regulation. The regulation mentioned, okay, not only a right to use title, you can now have a right to own title. So strata title ownership. So, but with an additional requirement, you can have it as long as it's in an area which has been stipulated as special economic zone, the free trade zone, the port zones, under industrial estates, or other areas which has been stipulated as an economic zone by the government. So how is it different? From a land title perspective, at least it will give additional comfort to the foreigner, because its land title, its property title will mention right to own. But is it the same as a freehold title owned by Indonesian individuals? No, it's not the same. Again, right to own freehold title is only available for Indonesian individuals. So even if you have a right to own strata title, the building, the basis, the land title, that is the underlying ownership of the building, remains a right to build. So the developer is still obligated to ensure the extension and renewal of the land title where the building is located. Okay, so as an owner, foreigners will have additional comfort. It's a right to own, but from a conceptual title perspective, it's still a right to build, under right to build, which still needs to be renewed and extended. Okay, next slide, please. These are just some additional new concept introduced by the government. Previously there is uncertainty on who's the owner of the underground space, who's the owner of the above ground space, if it's different from the one that owns the land. Previously, you need to rely on a contractual arrangement with the owner of the land. Now, in addition to a contractual arrangement, you can actually have a title document for underground space and for above ground space. Next slide, please. Next slide. Now these are the changes to licensing requirements in Indonesia. I mentioned earlier how it's notoriously hard to get a construction permit among other permits in Indonesia. We've seen cases where it takes 6 to 9 months, for investors and developers to have a building construction permit. Now, hearing all the complaints, the government took a drastic measure in removing building construction permit, in deleting it from the law. Now, this does not mean you don't need a permit to construct a building in Indonesia. Now, they changed the concept, they changed the regime so that this is named a building approval. Now, how is it different? Why is it different? Now, under the old law, which was revised by this implementing regulation of the Omnibus Law, all the technical requirements are listed in the law itself. So it's sacrosanct, it cannot be changed. And it is the government official who are required to ensure that all of the building technical requirements are met. So that explains why it takes months and months for you to get a construction permit. Because you need different groups of officials, to visit the building, to check the architecture, to check the mechanical, the engineering, and then to check the feasibility of the building. Now, how the government do it is that they establishes an online system, right? That online system will stipulate the type of classes of building, that someone wants to construct, and then so you input the data, input in terms of land documents or the technical data of the building. Of course, the owner will need to engage a consultant, a building consultant, to prepare the building consultant, to prepare the technical standards. Now, once all the documents are inserted in the online system, the experts team of the government must review that documentation. And under this implementing regulation, the experts team have only 28 days to confirm or to reject the application. Within the 28 days, there can only be a maximum of 5 meetings conducted between the building owner and the experts team of the government. So we call this a consultation period. Now, after the consultation period ended, there's only two ways this ends. Either you have your building approval, or it's rejected, and therefore you need to reapply the building approval application. So you can see how the government tries to cramp the process, trying to ensure that the process is expedited. Okay, and it actually they relies on the building construction service provider to ensure that all of the technical requirements are met. So that in the consultation period, things can go smoother. Now, this also applies to the next permit after you have your building approval. So you have your building approval, you construct your building. Once the construction is completed, you need to have a functional worthy certificate, your occupation permit, the SLF we call it. Previously, again, in the law, you have a very long list of requirements on how you can get this occupation permit, because the building needs to be able to function well, to ensure there's no accidents happening, for example. Similarly to a building approval, as opposed to requiring the government officials by itself to review, they can now rely to a technical reviewer, which is a professional, a licensed professional, a part of a building construction and occupational services. They will be the one who will conduct the review of the building. Once they've reviewed the building to ensure that it's worthy from a functional perspective, they can issue an approval. They can issue a recommendation. They can issue an opinion on whether or not it's met the technical requirements. Once the opinion is issued, then the government, if the opinion is clean, then the government must immediately issue the occupation permit. So again, you can see how the government tries to make the process easier by relying on appointed professionals to ensure that the technical requirements are met. Okay. Now we will discuss on the next slide on space utilization permit, the changes of space utilization permit. Next slide, please. Now, what is a spatial permit? Now, other than Jakarta, unfortunately, it's the zoning map, the detailed zoning map is not always available. If you try to acquire a piece of land outside of the greater Jakarta, you will know that you will be relying heavily on the zoning zoning regulations, zoning stipulations issued by the regional government. Now, not all regional government is ready with a detailed special planning plan, right? So what investors usually do is they go to the regional government, they inform them, I want to build apartment, for example, in this area. Now, I want to build it in this area. Can I do that? Right? If in Jakarta, you will have a regulation, with all the maps, very detailed on what can and cannot be done in that area, on your plot ratio, on your building ratio, on your parking ratio. In other certain areas, you will rely on the discretion of the government. And that sometimes causes headache because, if the officials change, then the policy may change. So that's why the government is trying to make sure that everything is in line, right? That everything must be in accordance with the centralized planning issued by the central government. So what you have here is a list of the type of spatial plans that will be issued. The idea is that if a certain district is not ready yet with a detailed zoning plan, then you can go up the layer so that it is the central government ultimately that will be able to issue a confirmation on whether or not a certain activity is possible in the area. Next slide, please. Okay, now this is the new permit that I mentioned earlier, spatial utilization confirmation. So I mentioned earlier how the intention is for the investor to be able to come into Indonesia and to be comfortable with their investment. So with this KKPR, the idea is an investor who is looking to acquire a certain land in a certain area will be able to go online into the government investment system, the OSS, what we call it now. The investor will be able to then just type in the information of the area. You know, where do you want it to be located? And what type of activities do you want to be doing in that area, right? And that system is meant to be connected with the systems in the relevant regional government, so that you know upfront whether or not you will be able to, say, for example, construct a residential operation, construct a data center, right? Or a warehouse in that area. And this KKPR is linked together with your business license. Okay, so once you have your KKPR, that document will then automatically allow you to apply for a business license. You know, depending on whether or not that activity requires additional licenses, of course. So as opposed to trying to go to the certain region, you know, fly into a remote area, get a confirmation, you know, deal with the discretions, deal with the policies, everything can be done online. So this is the KKPR. This is meant to replace other special approvals required in Indonesia, including location permit. Although I need to note that at this moment in time, currently, the infrastructure is not yet ready for it to be done online. But this can be applied for manually. So by visiting the Central Investment Board in Jakarta, this KKPR can be processed manually still, you know, while waiting for the infrastructure to be ready. Next slide. There are types of spatial utilization confirmation. So the first is a confirmation. If what you're planning to do at a certain area is already in line with the detailed zoning plan, it's easy, you know, just confirmation. Then you have which is an approval. An approval is where in a scenario where the local government has not yet issued a detailed zoning plan. And therefore, as I mentioned earlier, the central government will take over. So based on the centralized system, the central government will review the central zoning regulation, you know, to check whether from a centralized perspective there is no issue. Then they will issue an approval. Okay, and then the last type is recommendation. Recommendation is a special case, you know, whereby if it's strategic in nature, you know, if it's owned by a land bank, you know, even though it's not in accordance with the spatial planning, zoning plan, and also if it's a national strategic activities. As you know, but most of the time, you will be dealing with confirmation and approval. Okay, next slide, please. Land bank. So I mentioned about land bank. So it's a special government body, you know, that will be established by the government. So in a way, it's a state-owned enterprise, but it's named as land bank. It's an entity which will be given authority, you know, to plan, to acquire, to manage lands which has not yet been owned by other parties in Indonesia. Okay, so this include, you know, land titles which have expired, lands which have been abandoned, you know, reclaimed land, you know, small islands, you know, those who are before the land bank system is actually unclear. You know, no one knows who owns it. I mean, from a legal perspective, you can assume it's owned by the state, but not by a certain entity. Right? So with land bank, you will have an entity that will control this land. Okay, it can buy, it can sell, it can encumber, it can grant, you know, cooperation, enter into cooperation with third parties. Next slide, please. So these are just the some key differences. You know, the land bank will have a right to manage, hak pengelolaan. We call it HPL. This HPL will have a perpetual validity period. So it will be valid, you know, for as long as the land bank is in place. Now, on top of this right to manage, the land bank can issue the relevant land titles for investors. You know, your right to build, your right to use, your right to cultivate. So it will be an underlying land based on which investors can get a land title. What is the difference? Okay, the difference is that you will not have what we call a pure HGB, a pure right to build. In a sense that for an extension, for a renewal, for an encumbrance, you know, you will need to get an approval from the land bank. In a pure HGB scenario, you can deal directly with the government, right? But the good thing with land banks is that you can enter into a land utilization agreement with land bank where you can agree on these approvals upfront, right? And also, in the draft government regulation, it even states that the land bank can give you guarantee, assurance that you will have your extension and renewal. You know, something that the state cannot give. This title from the land bank is still, you know, bankable. You can still put encumbrance over it. So for those people who, you know, who prefer to deal with one entity, you know, which has the power, as opposed to the need of dealing with individuals who may or may not have clear land titles, this is a good alternative, right? Because you will have the assurance that you will not be getting with government in a pure land title scenario. Next slide, please. So that's my last slide.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Bima, for your explanation. And I think we're heading towards the end of the session. So with that being said, I would like to wrap things up for our event. Thank you all for your participation today. We hope that we address your concerns and that you found the content valuable for your business. Please feel free to contact us with any additional questions that you might have. Again, thank you very much, and thank you to our distinguished speakers, Mr. Panji Irawan and Mr. Andre Asmoro, as well as Mr. Bima Sarampuait for participating in today's event. So thank you again. Stay safe and stay healthy, everyone. Thank you.